Hi, this is Michael Romita, the President and CEO of the Westchester County Association, the leading economic development and business advocacy group for the Lower Hudson Valley. I want to thank you all for joining us today for part 2 of our Best Practices for Reopening Westchester series. As many of you know, Phase 2 started today for Westchester and the Lower Hudson Valley. That means outdoor dining and in-store retail. It means hair salons and barbershops. It means more folks in places of worship. It also means commercial offices are opening back up. But what kind of offices are we returning to? How will the use of the physical space change? What will common areas be used for? What sort of shared amenities will there be? And what does this hold for the future of real estate in Westchester? Today, we're joined by a panel of experts from across the real estate spectrum who are going to walk us through some of these issues. First, a shout out to our sponsors: CC Clean, RPW Group, Corporate AV Services, Grassi & Co., M&T Bank, Montefiore, Simone Development Companies, Sterling National Bank, Wells Fargo, and The Catalyst. That's the Westchester County Office of Economic Development. At this point, I'd like to introduce to you Melinda White, who's a Senior Vice President at Wells Fargo Bank, for an opening greeting.
Thank you, Michael. First of all, I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you, your families, your colleagues, and employees are all healthy and coping with the current environment. Wells Fargo has long been a part of the community and invested in the businesses and individuals of Westchester County. As such, we're committed to supporting the community in the successful reopening of our county for the mutual good of everyone here. To help us achieve that goal, our moderator, Al, our panelists, Mark, Sam, and Andrew, will provide us with actionable advice and best practices to ensure a safe return to our offices and businesses. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. With that, Michael, thank you for a few moments to greet everybody, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Melinda, and thanks for joining us and helping to sponsor our event. I believe we were supposed to have some opening words from County Executive Latimer, but he may still be tied up on his COVID briefing for the day. So if I get word that he's joined the call, I'll immediately introduce him for some opening statements. Meanwhile, just to remind the viewing audience, if you have questions, don't use the chat feature of your Zoom. Use the Q&A feature instead, and our moderator will help get those to the panelists. Our moderator today is Al Gutierrez. He's a managing director at JLL. He will introduce our individual panelists and kick off today's event. Al, why don't you take it from here? And if the county executive joins us, maybe we'll interrupt so he can say a few words. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. Really excited to be here. Actually, this phase 2 for me means that I too am back in my office, and it's probably one of the happiest days. I feel like a school kid who is starting his first day of school, and for that I am very excited. I am pleased today to introduce to you all our distinguished panelists. These industry experts are here to discuss with us what they're hearing and what they're experiencing as we enter into our work lives again. Our very first panelist is Andrew Weisz. Andrew is an executive vice president of RPW Group, one of the premier landlord organizations in Westchester County. He is responsible for directing the firm's real estate investment and leasing activities. In his role, Andrew is actively involved in sourcing new opportunities and leading the execution of business plans. Prior to joining RPW in 2017, he was an associate director at Newmark Knight Frank, where he marketed, repositioned, and leased office properties in New York City. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Al.
Sam Buckley is our second panelist. Sam is an executive vice president of New York Brokerage Services for Newmark Knight Frank. Sam is responsible for the company's strategic direction, performance, and growth in the firm's Manhattan, Midtown headquarters, and downtown offices. Sam brings a wealth of expertise honed through his more than 30 years of industry experience. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you.
And finally, last but not least, is Mark Van Sumeren. As a principal in charge of Perkins Eastman's national workplace practice and a member of the firm's board of directors, Mark has more than 40 years of experience in business development, management, and design of over 55 million square feet of workplace projects. His clients include Fortune 500 technology, pharmaceutical, insurance, telecommunications, consumer products, and financial services, including the likes of Google, Travelers, Charter Communications, and MasterCard, to name a few. Mark, welcome.
Del.
So we've assembled this group of panelists because we thought it would be important as we re-enter into our work life to really get a better understanding of what they're hearing, what their experiences have been, and how they're advising their clients and looking at their own individual organizations in preparedness and protocol for coming back to the workforce. Today's format is really going to be more of a spirited dialogue, and I encourage our panelists to chime in as appropriate with our Q&A process. And I will kick it off with just a general question for our panelists. And the first question is, what are you hearing from your clients? What are they approaching you with as they look and prepare to re-enter the workforce? Mark, why don't you kick it off?
I can jump in there. Thanks, Al. Our firm over the last couple months has really been on a listening tour, because when this all started, we really didn't have a good feel for what was going to be happening. And we've been very fortunate in listening to over 30 corporations at this point. And I think one of the really interesting factors that came out during those discussions were how important the workplace really is. I think we're seeing a lot of uncertainty as to when some companies are coming back in, be it large or small, but one of the most important things that we understood was about culture, brand, the ability to grow into the future, and that you couldn't really do that sitting at home. You couldn't do it from a remote setting. And it was consistent across the organizations that was one of the key roles that the workplace is going to play moving forward into the future, be it with a part of your program being remote or not. But the workplace is here to stay. It has maybe a different role, but an even more important role, I think, in shaping what the business future is going to be.
Mark, what do you think some of their concerns are as they develop their protocols for coming back in? Health, safety, what are the things that they're talking to you about relative to that?
Certainly all of that, and quite frankly, we're a tenant ourselves. We have offices across the United States. We've opened up 2 of our offices, one in Charlotte and one out in San Francisco, and that's simply because our buildings were low story, easy to get into. We didn't have high-rise elevator situations. So us, like any other client, we put together our own protocols. It's about feeling safe when you come into the building. We're looking for how are we going to access the building. How is the management looking at the elevators, the process to get to our own spaces? I think most tenants are developing their own protocols once you get to the space in terms of how you receive your employees, how you phase them, how visitors come in. So we're right in there. It's about making people feel comfortable that they can be in a space and be able to do their work and feel safe and be productive.
Sam, you're in a unique situation as you sit in New York City. Help us out a little bit. Tell us what you're hearing and what your experiences have been to date.
Well, for once, we're trailing the suburbs and not necessarily leading. We are only in phase 1 right now. I'm in my office today. This isn't a backdrop right now. I'm helping prepare the team to onboard. So we're hoping for phase 2, which would be office reopening in June. And we may even delay that a little bit longer to give people time through the holiday. Our main factor here is transportation. How are we going to get people in and out of the office? See, there's people calling, but nobody are here. And we're also, as a broker, we are a tenant too. We have 700 people here, and this is a monumental task that mainly Manhattan office tenants or perhaps some Westchester, when you're in these multi-story buildings and we're talking about how to get people up to these spaces, into the elevators, and we're having to provide social distancing, it's tougher. And we really need, we have people like Mark that are scrambling around trying to help us with the social distancing, because we're going to lose easily 50% of our capacity here for a little while, at least, as we onboard.
So that leads to a great discussion, and it's been a topic that's been coming up over and over again, which is that potential urban flight. Do you see an opportunity for the suburban markets? Are New York City tenants considering, for lack of a better term, de-densifying?
Well, it's not just de-densification right now. We're running deals, we're doing deals. We represent buildings all throughout Westchester, Fairfield, Long Island, Northern New Jersey. And there are literally dozens of tenants out there either taking space or inquiring about space that's ready to go. They're coming to their employees rather than making their employees come to them. These generally right now are looking like short-term leases, 1, 2, or 3 years. But we are definitely seeing, I wouldn't call it a flight, but they're making a move to help out their employees. Mark, this is really going to be a question for you too. When we talk about de-densification and then work from home, we're hoping and thinking and hearing from our clients that for that percentage of people that they think, wow, this works. We've just proved it. We've accelerated this experiment that people can work efficiently from home. That is some people. We are hearing from more and more and more that the culture they feel is at risk, and they're very concerned about it. So even if 20% of their people start working from home, we feel that there may be a balance taken and not a big shrinking in the footprint of the office space, because we have to expand out. And benching, and if you look behind me at all the seats, we're right now, it's eeny, meeny, miny, mo. We're going to be much less dense, at least for a period of time. And we're hoping for a balance between work from home and work from the office. Mark, I assume that's what you're seeing too.
Yeah, I would say that several of our clients, our Google client, others are re-looking at the workplace. Just what you said, that the work that may take place in an office environment may be more of a collaborative in nature. One of the number one reasons that people want to come back to the office that we're seeing in some of our research is to be with other people, to collaborate, to engage. So I think that's critical, and that will have I think it's going to be a balancing out, Sam, as we go forward. There's certainly going to be a certain percentage that are going to be working from home or a remote sense, or we go to flex working, since it is working currently. So that it may dial it down in the overall square footage, I think, a bit, but it's not a drastic cut where you're going to go 50, 75%. And just on your earlier comment relative to the suburban markets, I'm seeing it in Chicago and outside of Boston, that the suburban markets like Westchester are seeing movement and growth and deals happening in some of the same residential play happening in those segments. I've talked to our other practice area leaders, my partners out there. So it's a similar thing that's happening outside the big gateway cities where you have large, tall buildings and densification in terms of that, like, as you point out, not a surge, but there's movement already beginning to happen as people rethink, in the short term, what's taking place.
Yeah, I would add to that we've signed two leases, both New York City firms that the CEOs were a little older in age, and they had been thinking about potentially making a move to Westchester, and the COVID experience simply accelerated that. And they said, now's the time. I know there are leases out in downtown White Plains. There's been leases signed in Greenwich. You have a lot of the larger national, international occupiers that are looking around. They obviously have a lot more red tape in terms of signing leases. Whether they will or not will remain to be seen. But the smaller firms, 5,000, 10,000 footers, those are out, and those folks have begun to sign leases, and I think that will continue, especially as a lot of the talent that's in New York is starting to move out this way. I'm 30 years old. I have two friends, both recently married, that were thinking about moving out here in 2 to 3 years with leases expiring in Manhattan this summer. They said, you know what, let's make a move. So one of them rented an apartment in Bronxville and the other one's buying a house in Ridgefield, Connecticut. So, you know, I think the trends are just being accelerated. And the same thing goes with densification. I think densification, people were pulling back from that. It was first densify, densify, densify. And now people are saying, before COVID, you know, is this really as efficient as we think it is? And a lot of firms, I believe, found that it wasn't. And so this is just pushing that trend further along and quicker than maybe if COVID hadn't happened.
So Andrew, you're seeing this activity. What are the challenges as a landlord that you're having as we come into this world of reentry? What are you hearing from your occupiers as one of the premier landlords in this market? You have a portfolio that ranges from the 2,000 square footer to the Fortune 100 firms. What are you hearing from that swath of occupants in your portfolio?
So this has been an incredibly difficult task just because there's so much information out there and a lot of information that contradicts itself. So what we've been focused on is gathering all the information and then parsing through it and putting together what we think are the best practices to offer the safest work environment we can. So I think first and most importantly, the tenant-landlord relationship is as important as ever. Many times you have tenants in the marketplace that say, you know what, I want the cheapest rent. However the landlord operates, I don't really care. I'm gonna go to work and I'm gonna pay the littlest amount of rent I can, and then I'm going home. You know, a lot of those landlords maybe don't have the infrastructure needed to be able to deal with a pandemic like this. So we've been focused on trying to give tenants information so that they can educate their employees and make them feel safe. And I think the difficulty has been, you know, parsing through what really works and what doesn't, and then being able to get in touch with tenants and talk them through their concerns and make sure that they know that we are here partnering with them and that we will get through this together.
So as clients, or I should say, as your occupants are starting to come in, and I'll throw this out to all on the panel, there have been protocols that have been discussed, you know, limiting access points. What are the PPE requirements? Temperature testing at entry points in the buildings, elevator occupancy, restrooms. How are you handling all of that? And what are you, Mark, seeing and hearing from your clients? Sam, what are you hearing from the Newmark perspective? And then Andrew, what are you doing as well?
Yeah, I wanted to comment and answer your question, but just comment on what Andrew was saying. I think it's a transformative time in many ways. Every major event in history, when you look back at 1918, others, some big change happened in architecture or the way design happened or the way humankind went forward. And I think this is one of those times where we've had this massive shift overnight to working remote. People who didn't even know they had technology that enabled them to do it realized overnight that something had changed, and we've been living this for a bit. And I think, you know, landlords, they have got a tough challenge in terms of what they're going to face, but it's a time for them to sit back and think about what is it what do I need to provide for those tenants, and the owners of businesses are thinking about how do I service my clients better. How do I produce my products differently? And how do I now chase that same talent? So everybody, I think, is looking at the same things in terms of being safe and the protocols going forward. I don't know if I have an exact answer, but I think it's going to be a transformative time in history where the landlords who are really thinking out of the box and doing all the right things are going to create opportunities to excel with their real estate. And the end users are doing the same. So we're not quite there yet. I don't think over the next several months we'll figure more of that out. But I have to believe it could be a really exciting time going forward.
If I can jump in, I agree with that wholeheartedly. It's going to be a flight to quality and a flight to talent. Andrew, your example was a perfect one. If you have friends that are smart and they're coming out of the city and going there to raise their families, the companies will listen. They'll go to the talent. And that's the whole reason that Manhattan has just become what it is. This is where the talent is. This is why you have multi-decade commitments by these massive, massive companies like Facebook, Amazon, and Google. And look, they're not going anywhere. But New York has its issues. We are dealing with transit issues. We're dealing with a lot of things here, which we will. I think Manhattan's going to be just fine. But it is absolutely an opportunity, as Mark is saying, for there to be some transformative development. And I can only imagine you're so well situated to do that, not only in your existing products to take them to the next level, but if I can throw a curveball here, since this is a county organization, I thought of something and it dawned on me from back in my previous life when I was working in northern New Jersey, and you had towns like Parsippany in counties of Morris County. These are very high-end, high wealth counties that were extremely restrictive in anything that the developers like yourselves tried to do when it came to adaptive reuse or rezoning or things like monetizing township assets. If you look at what RXR and other smart developers were doing up in smart towns like New Rochelle, where they started to do those kinds of things, this is a real time for Westchester to get on board and make some changes and reverse what probably is going on, where the ratables are decreasing. You've got old office buildings that are not just long in the tooth, they've exceeded their life expectancy in some cases. Sit down, listen to the developers, and create a plan that works for these communities. You have a dialogue here that doesn't come along very often. It's a tremendous opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you, Sam. Just to jump off a little bit, I'm starting to get some questions from our audience, and no surprise, one of the questions that came up has to do with rental rates. And you know, the question is, everyone is asking what is happening with rental rates in Westchester and Fairfield. The assumption is that they are coming down. We were having a spirited discussion earlier about the infrastructure needs, the capital improvements that many of the occupants in New York City would demand as part of their relocation to New York City. Do you see there being an opportunity for a price increase, or do you see there being more of a price correction or reduction?
I think pre-COVID, there was a lot of good things happening in the county. The office stock, we were 10, 15 years ago, we were north of 30 million feet. We're currently at about 26 million feet. And that decrease is due to a lot of good development, multifamily, industrial, fitness, medical, all the things that we see sprouting around the county. And I think the better buildings in the county were benefiting that from an occupancy perspective and from a pricing perspective. I think that continues. I think you're going to see appreciation as the office stock continues to diminish. You do start to see an influx of New York City companies come into the marketplace. And those are companies that the average rent in New York City, and Sam, you might be able to pinpoint it better than I can, but it's roughly 65 to 70 bucks a foot. So to come from a Class B building in Midtown at 65 or 70 bucks to, you know, a great building in Westchester County in the low 30s, you know, for the companies that are interested in doing that, it's a no-brainer. And so I think between what was already happening, which was sort of a diminishing stock of office buildings, and an influx of some newcomers that were not currently in the county, I think that, and also for a new appreciation for Westchester. You know, companies that are here that maybe were saying, man, I wish we had an office in New York City, are now saying, gosh, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm on a third floor, I can park my car, I can take the stairs, and I'm in my office. So I think there's a lot of good and positive headlines coming out of this that I think are true.
It's like what's old is new again, right? Drive your car to the office and go up to the third floor. That's back in vogue. But you're exactly right. The pricing, I think you have room for growth. I really do. if you have a quality building, as we were discussing offline before, or online as well, if the talent's there and the companies want to be there, whether it's $35 a foot or $45 a foot, it almost doesn't matter. What matters is the talent there. That's the critical factor, and I think you're gaining in that.
So guys, I'm getting a little pushback from our audience where they're suggesting that aren't we entering into a recession, and as a result, shouldn't that have a negative impact on rental rates for commercial space?
It depends on the product. It completely depends on the product. Class A product is always first in, last out in a recession. So if you have really old Class B minus buildings, yeah, they might suffer.
Yeah, I was going to say, Al, and tied together with that, every client we talk to in terms of design of their space, we talk it in terms of the experience economy. And what that means is that we're designing optimum spaces with the right tools and ingredients really to support what these end users need to be fully productive in what they do. And now part of that is that combination of whether it's some remote working, but it extends into the office buildings themselves and things that Andrew was talking about earlier, whether the amenities, how you reposition the buildings, everything is catered to those high talent workers. And in my mind, I could see more important investments being made with the offices so that people are coming into a great environment. Top talent's still going to be tight in many types of marketplaces for the companies that want to grow and exceed, and they will be. So
let's stay on topic with the investments for a second. And we're hearing a lot of things like HVAC upgrades and technology to improve the experience of the office occupant coming into the building, like touchless entry systems. What are you guys hearing on that level? Elevator, modernization of elevator cabs, all of these things that are going to require some infrastructure improvements and investments. What's your take on that?
I think that's all important, and I think people are looking into that. Certainly, I know in New York City you are seeing some building owners put in touchless bathrooms, destination dispatch elevators. But I think, look, it's a difficult time just because tenants are having a hard time, and rent deferrals are happening. So landlords, on the one hand, are having to really fill the shortfall on rent collection, and on the other hand, expenses are going up, cleaning is going up, and there are other expenses that we are incurring due to COVID, like these upgrades, which in many cases make a lot of sense. So for us in particular, we are looking into touchless, but some nearer term things that we're looking at is to really expand the use of the outdoors. So when you stop into our cafeterias now, they're all grab and go, and you need to really pre-order. So you pre-order, you go to the cafeteria, you pick it up, and then we're putting out tons and tons of outdoor tables so that people can sit outside and enjoy the fresh air rather than being in their office. We're also doing similar upgrades to conference centers. We think that tenants are not going to want visitors in their space. There's going to be a greater need for using building conference centers. So we are investing in those, expanding those. And I think things along those lines are what people are going to be looking for. And they're going to be looking for landlords that work with them, that take their thoughts and be able to go back and forth and figure out best practices.
Sam?
No, I agree. And a lot of this stuff that we're worried about now is I don't want to say temporary, but a lot of the extreme stuff is temporary. After all of these events, after 9/11, there was no need to show somebody your driver's license every single time you went into a building. There weren't so many turnstiles. It was a lot easier to be a broker back then. You could just go walk in and canvass the building. You can't do that anymore. But we're going to see some changes, and those changes are going to be for the positive. I think the pendulum is going to swing from the densification to some de-densification, and that's going to make people feel more comfortable. Guys like Mark are probably going to be designing floors to be a bit more compartmentalized so that if somebody does get sick over there, we're not shutting down entire floors like what happened here at our 125 Park Avenue building in early March. That's pretty tough. Keeping the office clean and understanding just a healthy environment is going to benefit us all. One of the most common things that's going on in the buildings right now is changing the air filters to much more efficient, a bit more expensive air filters. And we're trying to get as much fresh air into buildings as possible. That's just common sense and good for everybody. So we're going to get some good things out of this, I'm sure. And hopefully not all of them need to be incredibly expensive in terms of this touchless technology. Elevators are going to be tough, frankly, for everybody for a little while until we're all not caring as much about getting into an elevator with more than 4 people. But some of these things are so simple. Like if I want to open the bathroom door now, there are these foot pedals that you can just drag the door open with your feet and you don't have to touch the handle. So maybe that's a benefit too, because it's just smart.
What are some of the safety protocols that you're going to be engaging in for your employees over the next couple of weeks and months?
We are following the guidelines that are being put out by the CDC and the state. I think for one thing, Andrew Cuomo to me is the one person I just religiously watch and makes sense and has common sense. And he's helped. There's an executive order that just came out this week because landlords were saying, hey, we're not taking anybody's temperature. We're not jumping into the middle of this because of the liability. So people like Andrew now and his firm have an executive order that says if you're taking temperatures, and you don't have to, but they're recommending, and if you're doing a scan and somebody tests above 101.4 twice in a row, and it just wasn't because, like me, I rode my bike to the office that day, you pull them aside and say, we're going to let your HR know, and then that company's HR handles it. But for us, we're making sure that we have hand sanitizer, everywhere. I've got chapped hands, everybody here does. And we're going to have distancing where I don't have to have a mask if I'm sitting at my desk right now, but if I get up and go to the men's room, which for a little while is going to be one occupant at a time, that's going to be interesting. But it's common sense. Wear a mask. Don't stand next to somebody and talk to them. Don't stand in somebody's office and talk to them until we figure this out.
So you brought up the social distancing topic. And actually, before we get to that, I do want to just pivot back to Andrew for a second. Having, a couple of million square feet of multi-tenant portfolio, how are you handling that safety protocol? And one of the things that I'm hearing as a recurring issue is restrooms. What are you seeing on that end, Andrew?
So, look, we're doing a lot of the things that I think a lot of people on this Zoom have read about or are implementing. But first and foremost, we are transmitting bi-weekly memos to all the tenants. So as I mentioned before, I think communication and common sense are the keys to this pandemic. The tenants want to hear from the landlord. So we are keeping everyone abreast, giving them all the information that we possibly can. From a more physical aspect, we are doing temperature checks at all the buildings. It is not required, but it's highly encouraged. So all the security guards at all the front desks have the thermometers and are taking temperature. We've done massive signage program throughout the buildings on all bathroom doors, stairwell doors, elevators, all the high touch points, alerting people to, the 6 feet social distance, wear a mask, etc. And then we've increased sanitization of all the buildings, all the common areas, and as well as the HVACs. So the MERV filters are the the order of the day. So those have been all implemented. Sanitization of all the HVAC systems. And then look, lastly, and most importantly is partnership with the tenants. Not one person can do this alone. So we need to really just work together to get to the point where we have a vaccine, at which point hopefully things will really settle down. But I think truly we're looking at this as a pre and post-vaccine timeline.
So on the topic of social distancing, Mark, when we got together early on, or late last week, I should say, you came up with a question that was being asked over and over again, which was, why do I need to come back to the office? How do you see the social distancing aspect helping or hindering that collaborative environment? And I think you touched on it in your opening remarks. Can you just expand a little bit?
Sure, Al. What I'd said when we were talking last week was one of the important questions companies are first asking themselves is, why do I need to go back to the office? What am I doing now that I need to go back to do that I can't do from a remote basis? And it breaks down along age lines. It breaks down by industry type about who needs to be in the office, but ultimately does fall into that collaborative type setting and environment. So where we are currently in the crisis, we're like everybody else, we're following CDC guidelines. We're looking at conference and meeting rooms, more enclosed spaces that there's only so many that can occupy, wearing masks, helping guiding clients on that basis. But we are trying to look at areas that in the future that would begin to design more communal spaces. So if you're having a meeting, an 8-person meeting, and you're not necessarily going to go into a small meeting room, but you might feel more comfortable standing outside that in a collaborative, more open setting. So it's common sense things like that we're seeing both for ourselves and for other clients. And I think going back to some of the other things that Andrew was saying that they're doing, once you get into the tenant space, there's some common sense things. I think we've all experienced that we're in an office and the guy next to you is coughing or sneezing. It may not be a fever, but they're bringing colds into the office. So one of the things where we're looking at is that if you are even anyway feeling sick with just a common cold, don't come into the office. I think every one of us knows stories of that person sitting and you're going, okay, I'm next. I'm going to get the cold this weekend and ruin my weekend. That is high on the list of enforcement and policy, both in our office and other clients that I see. So the social distancing, it's going to limit the amount of people that are going to be there, but I think we'll get there in terms of some design solutions that
and Mark, I think that's going to be a cultural thing too. You bring up a really good point. It used to be in the past that people felt like they had to be in the office, they had to be seen in order for the boss to see them, et cetera. So they would come in sick. And I used to work for a boss that was a little bit of a germaphobe, and if he heard somebody cough, he's like, out of here. But now it is, everybody's going to say, what are you doing here? Just go home. We'll Zoom with you. You don't have to be here. And culture, that's a very good thing. I think all of us are going to stay a lot healthier with that fresh new attitude.
Time will tell. Time will tell. I just hope we don't have short-term memories, right?
You have an office, I believe, don't you?
I think it's going to mean a lot more kids at home too. Think about what's going to happen at school. Kids coming into school sick it's really not going to be tolerated. That's going to put some even additional pressure on the parents too. It's going to be a side effect of this for the foreseeable future.
So what are the things that you guys are most struggling with in this post-COVID era as you advise your clients and as you come back into the workforce environment?
For us, everybody's kicking the can and nobody really wants to act right now because there are so many things going on. We're starting to get clarity. We're starting to see what's happening in the rest of the country. I am on calls literally 4 to 5 days a week, national calls with our brokers, our sales agents, capital markets, and our area really got hit the hardest. So even though you guys are opening first, nationally, we're seeing things come back to the new normal much, much faster than you would imagine. So I think we're going to be following that pretty soon, but right now it's kicking the can and not wanting to make a decision. I also think that there's a lot of attention in the headlines for the Facebooks and the Twitters saying everybody's going to work at home now and forever, amen. Well, that's a little bit self-serving, right? That's what they want. They're technology companies, and they really want people using their platforms. We are not hearing that from CEOs of service-oriented companies where they really want their people back in the office so that they can collaborate. And they're very, very concerned about the culture. It's one thing for those of us who might know each other to be able to get on a Zoom and we can get each other's expressions and we understand where we're coming from. But imagine somebody coming into a new law firm or real estate company or an architectural firm not knowing how to react with people. The culture is going to suffer if we don't get this back together pretty soon. That's number one complaint that we're hearing.
Mark, I thought you were ready to comment on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you have a comment on what?
I was gonna totally agree with what Sam was saying, and I see it in our larger. I think it breaks down the larger users with the greater resources and things that they have. They are kicking the can a bit. I think they want to see what happens over the summer and the fall. So as an architect trying to find work, design projects, you know, when you think about how we're operating, we've got a lot of solid backlog, but it's with existing clients. And we're starting to see some of the smaller clients, the green shoots, starting to look out, as Andrew was mentioning before, in terms of tenants he's seeing doing those deals. I think over this next 2 to 3 months here is going to be very telling in the regional tri-state real estate market and the suburban marketplace. But I think we're just starting to feel some of see the feelers coming out. And quite frankly, as you guys were talking about earlier, the house next door to me has been on the market for 4 years. A guy was trying to flip it. A young couple from New York, moved in about a month ago, bought it, young 30s, just had a baby 2 weeks ago. So we're already seeing that movement out to the suburban market that way. So I think there's some subtle underpinnings that are taking place and advancing. So,
and I think, look, there's still a lot of uncertainty out there from, you know, a strictly real estate perspective. The debt and equity market shut down, the investment sales market shut down, and for all intents and purposes, the leasing market shut down for 3 months. So we don't know when things are really going to come back, and what that's going to look like, and you know, will the COVID come back? You know, that is a concern and one that we're preparing for as well, and that's going to change the perspective of all of this if we're back in a similar situation in November, December. Hopefully, you know, it doesn't happen, and we're obviously much better prepared. But I think for us, the concern is just what does the next 6 to 18, 24 months really look like? And we're really spending a lot of time trying to evaluate and best prepare for whatever that is.
So guys, and Andrew, you might be able to help with this since you have a lot of smaller tenants in your portfolio. We've got a question from our audience. And the question is, you know, they're a smaller firm with less than 10 tenants. What safety or which safety protocols fall to the landlord versus the tenant?
So we want to, as best we can, ensure that from the time that the employee gets to the building and gets to the door of their space, that they are safe and that they don't, you know, that we minimize any touch points, et cetera. Once they walk into the door of the office, it's really up to the business owner and the managers to implement the right protocols to keep the employees safe. So whether that is doing teams, so you have a team A and a team B coming in, one team comes in 2 days, the other comes in 3 days for the social distancing. Some companies are electing to do more sanitization. There's all kinds of new products out there that they fog the entire, mist the entire office, and it kills 99.9% of all germs. A lot of companies are providing PPE. So there's a whole slew of things you can do. It's just a matter of, do you have private offices? Do you have open areas? What's your culture? What do you do? Are people coming in and out? Are they mostly sitting at their desk? So it's hard to pinpoint one thing, but I think some of the things I mentioned are what we're seeing a lot of companies do.
Yeah, the landlords are responsible for door to floor. So Andrew's going to be doing a lot of cleaning, a lot of sanitizing. His people are probably going to be very, very visible for all of his tenants. And that's what landlords are making sure they do. Also the cafeterias, like you mentioned before, Andrew, it's going to be grab and go for a while. Fitness centers, maybe those are eventually going to start to open up for private sessions where you have a trainer come in and making sure that everybody's socially distant, but that's going to mean cleaning the locker rooms for you. I think tenants should expect to and should welcome, there's going to be extra costs. Some of these costs are going to be pass-throughs. The new filters that everybody wants, those aren't cheap. That extra sanitation, that extra porter, certain amount of things are going to be pass-throughs, but it's going to make it a better work environment for everybody.
Yeah, and I think the key to all of this, again, is we've been focused on working with business owners and the business managers to make sure that we are aligned. We are enforcing that everyone wear a mask in a public space in the buildings, and we've asked that the business owners partner with us on that and tell their employees to do the same thing. Every once in a while, you see someone without a mask, and we want, before you leave your space, put a mask on. Make sure the managers are enforcing it. Make it part of your culture.
Well, you have an executive order at your back now too, Andrew. You told us a story about somebody getting in the elevator who just wouldn't wear a mask, and he was citing certain political reasons. That's not cool. If you can, it's kind of like going into a store, no shirt, no service. It should be the same thing. It's for everybody else's safety. That person may be very selfishly thinking that he doesn't need to protect himself, but he sure does need to protect the rest of us, especially with that attitude.
Couldn't agree more, Sam.
Hey, can I just mention something too? This is another little a diversion.
Bring it on, Sam.
I can tell you that there's an elephant in the room too. I just want to bring up what we're doing here, especially in New York. I live here. I've seen what went down in the last 2 weeks. We're talking COVID, and reopening. Our industry is powerful. Our industry is strong. It's influential. I know that as a firm, we're very, very grounded in a lot of civic and social matters. We all, as a group, I think we need to diversify. We have a committee that, like many, many things that COVID did, was an accelerator. These last 2 weeks have been an accelerator. We have a commitment to diversifying something that is not an incredibly diverse industry, certainly on the brokerage side. But I think that the industry, and I'm sure that the Westchester organization can step up with this too, but we should not, silence is complacency, and there are changes that need to be made. I'm not going to talk about police forces or anything else, but it's time for us to make sure that we really, really work on our diversity and our hiring practices to give more opportunities to people who may have been marginalized. I'm going to get off that soapbox now, but I think it needed to be said.
Thank you, Sam, and we do appreciate that. These are some very trying times, certainly challenging from the COVID perspective and from a social perspective. So, recognizing what you just said, we do appreciate that. I do have one question from one of our dear friends in the market, Howard Greenberg. And his question is, real estate is a business where FaceTime, not on the phone, is important with clients, tenants, and deal makers. How are you as panelists thinking about how to keep those personal relationships?
Oh gosh, I mean, I'll speak from an architectural perspective or personal. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I'm exhausted because I'm on the phone like 8 to 10 meetings a day. I don't know where the days go. I don't even know what today is, but it's one after the other. And a lot of them are recurring meetings set up with clients, with other people like ourselves that we're speaking to. So it's a lot of extra work to do it and do it remotely. The one thing that's been very empowering with everybody working remote, when we've been pitching work locally, but also around the country, it really doesn't even matter anymore. We pitched a job in Los Angeles with myself here, someone from Virginia, a Toronto, and 3 LA people, and it's the right team to do the job. And the client was fine. We're using technology to be able to do that. But I would say that not having, yes, ultimately you want to have that connection, but some of those barriers have broken down, I think even more so. And it's been empowering that way I mean, Brad Perkins, who's the chairman of our firm, was a long proponent of butts and seats, and architecture is a team game. And he finally had to admit to us all and tell them that it's actually working remotely. So we'd all like to get back into the office or some structure at some point, but there's been other parts that have been liberating in terms of a different type of connection.
I think it's creating opportunities for everybody, Mark. What you're saying is the same thing that we're seeing. You can do business across the country and across the world quite easily. And there's a humanizing factor that's going on too. We're seeing you in your study. If this had been a few days ago, you'd have seen me in my kitchen. So it really does humanize people. And we've been telling our brokers, especially the young ones that don't have their connections yet, if you are not trying to, I don't even want to say canvas, if you're not trying to help and prospect at the same time, because firms like ours and firms like yours, we're churning out a lot of public service announcements. We have an awful lot of papers that we're all churning out, writing, or just passing along that help. And a lot of our people genuinely do want to help. There are a lot of not-for-profits out there. Certainly think about the retailers now that have been absolutely kicked in the teeth by this. There are tons of opportunities, but if we see something that's going out that's predatory, we put a stop to it so fast. This is not about the dollar. It really and truly is about helping. And when you help, you establish those connections and those relationships, they're going to last a career. So we've seen a real reset with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say really more on a personal level, while certainly this has been incredibly isolating, as the weeks went by, I started reaching out to people, family, friends, colleagues that I haven't spoken to in years, that they're home, I'm home, we connect. And so there have been a lot of relationships that had gone dormant that are now starting to revitalize because of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a great appreciation for human interaction. And at the end of the day, that's why the office space will never go away. We need to be interacting and we need to be together. And if you're ambitious, want to get ahead, it's very hard to do that over the computer. And I think the Zoom and everything is a great stopgap, and it will work for some people, but the majority of folks, the way to get ahead and to really push yourself is to be in an office with other people. So I think that, long term, this is going to show that the office is absolutely here to stay. And I say that obviously as an office owner, but I genuinely believe that. I really do feel that the office is an important part of people's lives.
And what you're talking about, again, you nailed it. That's part of collaboration. So you want to be in the office with your team members and your people. And back to what Mark is saying as well, what we've all been experiencing is this gives us the opportunity to meet people, new people, faster and easier. If anybody in this firm had tried to canvas somebody and say, hey, do you want to hop on a Zoom and speak to our workplace strategies people about reboarding or doing something else? The answer would have been no. What, you want me to FaceTime? Basically, it's like FaceTiming. Now that's become much more common and a lot easier. So culture is critical, but there's a springboard now, I think, that we've all learned, this accelerant for being able to communicate and be effective in a whole new way from home office or an airport lounge, hopefully an airport lounge soon.
And I'll just add, Howard, we're open for business. Bring us your tenants, please.
Well, we are coming to the end of our discussion, our spirited dialogue. And gentlemen, I do want to express my deepest appreciation. Your words of wisdom, your experience, your knowledge is of great value to our community. And for that, we are grateful for you spending the time with us. We're looking forward to the future. I had a mentor that always used to say to me, during the difficult times, just put your put your head down and move forward, because this too shall pass. And very clear that you guys are optimistic, and thank you for that, because there is a brighter tomorrow without a doubt. Any parting words from our panelists?
Great. Thanks for having us. Having myself, I really appreciate being with these guys. They're experts in what they do, and I too, I am optimistic going forward, Al. I think that's something that we all feel.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
And I'll just add that, and I've said this a couple of times before, but it is true. Westchester County and Fairfield they're great places to work and live, do business. It's truly a community, and we look out for each other. And there's just been a tremendous amount of goodwill during this difficult time in our community. So I'm appreciative of being a part of it. So thanks.
Here, here. Thank you all. Michael, with that, I think I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, and thanks to all the panelists. Look, the key takeaway from me in hearing from all you experts is nobody asked for this. We're all living through a global pandemic, and it's an incredibly stressful situation. But if you look to the future and the long term for the real estate in Westchester County and the surrounding region, there's reason for a tremendous amount of optimism. The county and the region is well positioned for the future to solve long-term systemic problems, both in workforce, in the availability of real estate for the commercial tenant, and also for the residential community. County Executive George Latimer has just joined us, and we're delighted to have him on board to make a few closing remarks before we wrap things up. So George, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I have been listening actually on just the audio side of it to some of the conversation, and it's very helpful for those of us here in the government to understand the challenges that we've got and how we look to overcome them. Bridget Gibbons, our Director of Economic Development, has been participating even longer on this, and we hope we'll find some ways together. Obviously, the substance of what was spoken about is really why we were on this call. I'll just leave it with the basic symbolic stuff. It's about 8-9 weeks ago when we were first watching the rise in the cases of COVID, and none of us are medical scientists, so we didn't really know what we were seeing and how it would, how it would impact us. We were watching a rise in cases. We had seen on the television what had happened in Italy a few weeks before that, and how there was just, frankly, death and sadness everywhere. We didn't know why Westchester was singled out for this kind of intense situation. And we knew that as we started to see the shutdown of the society, the containment zone in New Rochelle, followed by other actions that the governor took to close this business and that business, how are we going to come back from this? And those of us who know our math, we looked at from a county government standpoint, the loss of revenue. We calculated that we could lose in the vicinity of $200 million worth of revenue this year, which would be catastrophic. But where we are now, 2 months later, is symbolic of where we are as Americans, which is we're on the way back. We're dealing as best as we can with a difficult situation. Nobody has a roadmap. Nobody has the game plan. Nobody was there in a very different America in 1918 to figure out how we would apply that to 2020. But my general sense is that the people on this call, all of whom are successful and bright at what they do, those of us in government, those of us in the not-for-profit world, those of us in the clergy, those of us who are small business owners, in addition to those who are large business owners, we will find a way through this. We're starting to find a way through it right now. There are requirements that we have as a business, in a sense, to restructure the way our workers work, to restructure the way we interact with the public. This, Zoom, WebEx, strange, wearing a mask, different, strange. Not what I like to do. I started life as a salesman, a marketeer before I went into public office, and all of that is human contact face to face. But we're finding a way, and we will find a way. And ultimately, as a society, not as a government, as a society, we are working our way through this. My job, Bridget's job, those of us in government, is to find a way to be your partner, to find a way to cut through some red tape where we can find it, to make decisions that are common sense decisions. And that's not always so obvious when we deal in the world of government and politics. But we hope to be your partner. We hope to help you and you help us through this. And I do think there's reason for optimism. I think there's some trend lines that are going to give Westchester a better tomorrow. I'm not going to be impatient. It's not going to happen in the next week or 10 days. It's not going to happen to suit a political calendar, but it'll happen because we work together. And our commitment to you is that we are going to try to make that partnership as real and as tangible as we can.
Thanks, George. As we close by cycling through our event sponsors, a couple of closing notes, some liner notes. Coming up June 24th is another one of our reopening series. This one's focused on nonprofit resources to help your business reopen successfully. And then again on July 8th in the series, how digital technology will alter the economic landscape in the wake of the pandemic. These are all of our corporate sponsors. Thank you very much for supporting our fine work. Thank you to the panelists, and Al, thank you to you for moderating the panelists. If you want more information about the Westchester County Association and our programs, you can go to our website at westchester.org. Please take our short 2-minute survey, which you can find at westchester.org/survey. It'll help guide our work on the future of the economy of Westchester. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you all soon.